Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rich, Simple, Human. I'm Lindsay Francis, and here we go again with another very exciting interview because I handpick all my guests because I think they've got something really interesting to share about living a rich, simple human lifestyle. Karina, welcome to the show. I've asked you to join me today because you and I have got absolutely loads of things we like to talk about. Most importantly, cultural awareness, behaviour, and what we see people doing right and what we see people doing wrong. And although we come from two very different sectors, I'm in the behaviour change space and you are a cultural expert, we have an awful lot of crossover in the work that we do. Karina, I don't want to do you a disservice by introducing you incorrectly, so I'm going to ask you if you would give our listeners just a quick overview of who you are and what you do, and then I'm going to jump straight in with some pretty challenging questions.
Wow, what an intro. I'm excited. Thank you for having me. So, yes, as you said, Karina, my company is called StarCat. It's a Middle Eastern consultancy and training company. And I basically have a real passion for the Gulf. So, when I say the Gulf, it's like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, and Kuwait. And I always find that many Western companies and entrepreneurs ask me lots of questions. What is it like to be a woman doing business in places like Saudi? How do you dress? Do people even talk to you? And there's so much misconception around everything. And at the same time about doing business out there, that I just feel really called into demystifying some of these old beliefs and also help people, because I just think, we can bring our cultures closer together if we just understand and take a little bit of interest.
It's a beautiful introduction, and thank you so much for using the word called, because when we truly work in our passion and our purpose, of course, you and I both know that's when our work really flows, when we get into what we really feel like we're called to do. Karina, I know that you've been in this game for quite a long time. You've got an absolutely stellar record for advisory services for the Gulf, and you work across sectors as well, which I find most interesting. I've asked you lots of interesting questions about what I see, especially in the field of education, business, and growth. Karina, the question I'm going to ask you first is about what was the biggest moment for you when you realised the importance of really listening in to what was going on, whether that's from a work perspective or personally. When did you first realise that listening was absolutely crucial to this piece of work that you do?
I don't think there was a specific time, but I think I always found the more I listened, especially to my Saudi, my Emirati, my Qatari friends, the more I actually understood, because some of the things that also I thought in my mind were a thing, they probably weren't a thing. And people really demystified them. And that's why I now take this approach where I ask lots of questions, because I just want to know, and people just generally want to share and they want to help. And I think the more you listen, the more you understand. And I think we all do this not enough, me included. I think, we always want to get our point of view across, and you always want to say something to when people tell you this, that, and the other. But actually, to just take a step back and not say anything is the most powerful, right?
Absolutely. And to use the words of Viktor Frankl, between every action and response, there is a pause. And that's where it all happens, both in business and in life. Of course, if we're talking about relationships, both professionally and personally, it's what's happening in the unsaid that makes the difference, obviously not what's really being said. Karina, the reason that you and I have these conversations so often is because we both keenly observe the culture that we live in currently being very me first, very consumer success orientated. And that doesn't align as well when you leave, I think, the UK and America and start pushing into some other cultures that don't quite have the same orientation, and I'll use that word very sensitively because it's not about progress. That is a very, very important thing to become aware of. We're not all alike, we're all very different. What's the biggest challenge you see companies facing when they go to expand, grow, or launch in the Gulf?
I think the biggest challenge, and I've talked about this endlessly on social media, is that they think they can do exactly the same that they do in London or New York. And they take exactly that same approach to Riyadh or Dubai or Doha or Muscat. And it just doesn't work. It already doesn't work if you take the same approach that you do for Dubai, for Abu Dhabi, because there's differences. And people are like, no, we're not interested in your cookie cutter approach. You need to really do this much better. And I think in order for companies to get this right, it is so important to understand who's your customer, what really matters to them. And not only that, what matters to the country, because that is a whole different thing. And and people would say, I mean, why would we care what matters to the country? Well, in the Gulf, it's very much what matters to the country most likely matters to business people and to businesses because they're very much aligned with what is going on in the country. And that's very different, like so many other things, to the UK, to the US. And I mean, I'll give you another example. I mean, I am German, and in Germany, everything is very formal, and people just don't understand that in the Middle East things are a lot more informal, and they just think, "Oh my God, these people are so rude. Why can't they not write dear Mr. Mrs.?" I'm like, because this is just not a thing. This is a very German approach, and it doesn't always work. And sometimes you just have to take a step back. Or the same is like with timekeeping. It's like I used to have somebody that I used to work with, and he would be like, it's 5 o'clock. Didn't you say we were going to meet them at 5? I'm like, yeah, but not 5 on the dot. It might be 5:15, it might be 5:30, but this is a very German thing. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I think you just have to be observant of that and just know that it may go different. And that's fine. But so many people are not. And then they're surprised why it doesn't work. They're like, oh my God, I've stacked my meetings too close together. And now I have to leave because this meeting is running late. And it's like, and if you had known this before, you probably would have left yourself a bit more breathing space. So it's about all of these kind of little things.
There's so much in what you've just said, and I'm laughing because I've had various cultural experiences over the years. I've raised my children in rural France for a part. I had a Dutch business partner for a while, and I observed quite a lot of business activity with, yes, Americans from New York. It couldn't be more different. And what works for one is actually offensive sometimes to another, even in that small pool. And I've learned the hard way not to be offended and to proceed with caution. Can I just check in with you? Is 5 o'clock really 5 o'clock in your culture? What does that mean for you? And meal times as well. What are our expectations here? This is particularly interesting if anybody is listening and has actually been bold enough to recognize the fact that they have control needs, because many of my clients are incredibly successful and they operate because they have very, very rigid policies and procedures for themselves and other people, because their control needs are what really makes them feel safe. This is not going to go well if you're then kicking off or feeling really anxious in a cultural environment that isn't running the way that you would normally expect. Karina, I'm sure you've observed that many, many times.
So many times. And I just gave a talk on the Middle East to some executive assistants not long ago. And basically, I said to them, this is also why you are so important, because you have to educate your bosses, because they might just tell you, stack it with meetings. We need ROI. We need to make sure that we make the most of this trip. But sometimes making the most of this trip basically means having flexibility, because very often this is when you get the best meetings. And if your schedule is really rigid, you have no time for flexibility, and that makes it really hard. And these are like also some of the things that I teach. I've just created a new course which is called the Gulf Etiquette Success Playbook, and I was surprised, there was even a lot of expats in the Middle East. One guy who was in Saudi for 20 years, he signed up and he's like, the course is amazing because it makes me understand this so much better. So there you are, you can never finish learning.
Karina, you're particularly adept. In fact, I would like to say that you're naturally very gifted at this, because you're so, so right. This etiquette conversation that seems to have gone out with the ARC is so, so important. And it always has been. Of course, I think we've ignored it. We've brushed it under the carpet a little bit, especially in parts of Europe and North America. But when you get it right, the attention that somebody feels is being lavished upon them is priceless. And the whole debate around social media, especially if people are listening with children or teenagers, is attention is now our most valuable asset. So valuable that organizations will do anything to capture and keep your attention, because that is where they know that you can be manipulated, sold to, and used as a, well, for the bottom line. When people feel like you're paying attention, especially in those settings, you're right, it's golden. It's absolutely priceless. So if you are listening and you've recently been traveling in the Gulf and your diary is not run the way you would like it to run, please be aware of everything that Karina has just said. When you leave space to be attentive to your potential customers, to leave space to react to what they may wish to invite you to. These are very hospitable countries. They have very, very different cultural practices than we do. You do allow yourself space to really engage in those relationships fully. Karina, I'm going to ask you about how on earth you ended up in this line of work, because it's not quite as obvious. You're a German woman working with an expertise in this field. How did that happen?
It's actually quite a funny thing because I never really set out to do this. I've worked in hospitality for a very long time, and I always wanted to go to London. I went to London on a school trip, and I really wanted to come back and live there for a little bit. And that's exactly what I did when I finished my training. So I ended up working in a big London 5-star hotel, and they had a lot of Middle Eastern clientele. And I really fell in love with the culture and like how hospitable they were and how open they were when you were actually taking an interest, coming back to that, taking an interest, asking questions. And I loved it. And I could see how misunderstood they were. And I always kind of felt, but I just don't understand. If you ask a few questions, they're really nice and they're really happy to explain to you. And they had like a lot of the Europeans and Westerners that I've worked with, they like stereotype them. Oh, they are this, they are that, they don't know enough. Do they even speak English? Things like that. And the stereotyping is something that hits home for me very much so, because I actually grew up in East Germany. And I was 12 when the wall came down. And basically, the stereotyping was just off the charts on both sides. So I then ended up studying in West Germany, and people were like, oh, the people from the East, they have no clue about nothing. And then at the same time, the people in the East were like, oh, the people from the West, they were so arrogant. And maybe that's another reason why I fled to London. I don't know, because I was like, I'm so sick of this. And that's kind of very much the same that I still see in the Middle East. And I feel like if I can be that bridge between the West and the Middle East and give people a little bit of a different view from somebody who's not grown up there, who doesn't speak the language, then I think that's my mission accomplished. But that's also, I think, for me, helping to dispel stereotypes, because I hated being a stereotype. I still do. And people, I mean, this is the wild thing. People still say that to you in Germany when they ask you, oh, where are you from in Germany? From the East or from the West? I'm like, who cares? Like, this is years ago. Nobody cares anymore about this, but people do.
Believe you me, they really do. And I'm, a blonde white woman. That's a label I can't really get away from. And people still say the most incredible things to you, even in this day and age, about being blonde or being a bit dopey or being a woman. And it surprises me so much. And I've got daughters as well. I think our subconscious bias is so active, and social media drives us into these wormholes where we begin to think everybody thinks like us. And then when you go into the real world, like you and I do, and have actual conversations in human form, which is the best way to, who knew that was the best way to have a conversation, actually face to face in the same physical space, you begin to realize that we have become, I want to say, prejudice, actually. We're not as clever as we think we are, and we miss the mark. People that are truly successful are the ones who can do this incredibly finite, granular behavior change, giving attention, receiving this sort of, like you say, this hospitality with genuine grace. And it's my hope for every young person that they begin to realize how important that is, that this loneliness, this isolation that they're feeling can be alleviated when you learn to deeply connect with other human beings, no matter their status, their culture, their race. What a beautiful prayer that would be for the world, Karina, as we move forwards. I'm going to ask you about what you think has happened in yours and my lifetime, because as you were talking, I remembered that I had a university lecturer when I was at business school in the 90s who used to say, think global, act local. So this is not a new concept. What do you think has happened over the last, we'll be kind to ourselves, 20-ish, in the world that has made people so much less aware?
I think it's interesting because we have so many more tools, and in a way social media I think brought us closer together, but I think it also exposed a lot of the gaps a lot more, because suddenly you can find out about everything and anything any time of day, which you never could before. I mean, like, God forbid, in the 90s, you could probably go to the library because, yes, people had the internet, but it wasn't really, that much of a thing like it is now. I mean, now you go on social media to get all your information, rightly or wrongly. And I think, again, that then also helps because we all victims of the algorithm. So if you end up watching a video and that one has an opinion in one direction, you get served lots more of those. So you think this is the only thing that's happening because you don't see a different view when there's plenty of different views. So I think you have to always look at this with a little bit of caution, right? And I think this is interesting because I think during COVID, it became very apparent, and it never became that apparent to me before, that things were very much black and white. You were either with this or you were against this. There was no middle ground. And I'm like, but there is always a middle ground. And like, life is not just black and white. Like, there's so many different shades, but people seem to have forgotten this. And I think this is also a little bit sad because it puts you into a certain box where it's very difficult to get out. And I think that's why I think some of these stereotypes have persisted. Yes, we have access to much more of the world, but do we actually know what's happening locally? So many people don't. And that to me is so interesting because also, for example, for me, when I go to Saudi, a lot of the people in Saudi then say to me, you've done this and this. I live here. I haven't even thought about this. So like, I'll give you an example. I went, in February, I went to Jeddah, and one of the things that I wanted to do in Jeddah, they had on an art exhibition called the Biennale at the airport. And I had read about this and I was like, this is great. I really want to go and see it. So it was so good. I went twice. It's kind of funny. And one of my Saudi friends said, I haven't even gone. And it's been on for like 2 months because it was on for like, I don't know, 6, 7 months, something like that. And she was like, oh, okay. But now that I've seen your pictures and now that I've seen that you have gone, I think I'm going to go too. So it's that kind of thing, isn't it? Sometimes you just have to kind of push yourself to look a little bit more outside of your comfort zone and see what's actually close, because whatever is close and convenient, we end up not doing, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm embarrassed about the little I've seen of the UK. And when I speak to friends of mine, especially from America, and they say, have you been here? Have you been there? And I think, I don't even know what you're talking about. Let's not say the fact that I mentioned the fact that I've never been to the Edinburgh Fringe, which is actually shameful. And so that's on my list to do before I get caught out again by somebody saying to me, oh, surely you've been. No, I've never bothered. Karina, being a curious person, I think is unusual. You're curious and you have a deep level of attention. And I will admit now to listeners, because if they've listened before, they know that I'm quite upfront in saying that I think just because I've watched a 30-second YouTube clip, I could rewire my own house, replumb my own bathroom, repair my car. I genuinely sometimes think, well, I've just watched a YouTube on that, so I'm sure I could do it. And of course, because I'm very self-aware, I catch myself in these little fibs that I tell myself, absolutely don't be ridiculous, Lindsay, of course you can't. But I genuinely think we've lulled ourselves into a state of, I can't think of a better word. It would be fag packet expert in our days. But can you just articulate when you see that happening? I must know what I'm doing because I've done X for 10 seconds.
I think the example that comes to mind where people always tell me, they're like, oh yeah, I know the Middle East. I've been to Dubai twice on holiday. And I just think, oh God, you haven't seen anything, because Dubai is a bit more like an expat town nowadays. This is not where you're going to meet the real locals. And certainly if you then look, for example, into Saudi or Qatar, it is so different. Just because you've been somewhere doesn't make you an expert, which goes back to your point, which you said about YouTube. It's the same. People go, oh, I can Google the etiquette. Yeah, I'm sure you can, because it will give you certain pointers, but is it going to give you the right pointers? And is it going to give you the pointers that really move the needle? Because Probably not, because it's just stuff that, Google has found and will give you some generic overview. But wouldn't you, I mean, that's the case for me, wouldn't you rather learn from somebody who has actually tested stuff and done things and made their own mistakes? I mean, I'm sure Google hasn't quite done that. So, like, for me, that beats anything, like experience, people where you can tell a story. This has happened to me. This has happened to my client. This is how we dealt with it. And I would take that any day over let's Google it, or let's ask YouTube for a quick 5 minutes, because you also don't know what opinion does this person have. Is this opinion, and how are you going to judge that when you are not an expert in that situation? Like, how do you know what is right and what is wrong?
I think it's absolute ignorance, isn't it? We don't even know what we don't know, but we think we know everything because here we are in a digital age with AI and more information than we've ever had before. The question I always raise to my own clients is, here we are with as much more information than we've ever had before, yet you are still suffering with sleep, anxiety, behaviors that you don't want. So it's not the information that's missing, it's the understanding, the integration, and the awareness, the consciousness. And sophrology is the study of consciousness in harmony. It's this awareness piece that you have that allows you to be an expert in accompanying, guiding, and educating people. Karina, you just said something about etiquette. I'm going to ask you to reply to this. If somebody said to you, does etiquette really move the needle? Bearing in mind that these are multi-billion-dollar deals we're talking about, and I know that people sometimes think it doesn't. If somebody says to you, does etiquette really move the needle? What would you say?
150%, because, and it may not be the case over here in the UK or in the US, but out there in the Middle East, everything is built on trust. And trust means you have to work for this trust. This trust is not a given. You're not going to walk into that first meeting and sign a multi-million-dollar deal, because people don't even know you. They want to get to know you. And in order to get to know you, you have to build up a relationship. And that relationship is based on trust. And very different to many other parts of the world, people also want to know you as a person. They want to know what you stand for and what your values are. And do you actually take an interest in them beyond the business? And that's the biggest thing. And for that, you need to know the etiquette, because if you don't, like it's very easy to destroy what you've tried to build beforehand. So for me, etiquette, 100%. Yes, people think it's a nice to have, but it's not a nice to have. It's a must have. And it's so funny because whenever I put out posts on etiquette, I've had so many locals, I've had so many C-level Saudis who then wrote under my post, you are 100% spot on, because I didn't deal with this person because of this and this and this. And I was like, well, there you go. There's my proof. Like, I don't need anything else. I'm not saying this because I have nothing else to do. It's because that is the truth. And people will ghost you and you will never hear from them again if you make that mistake. And there you are.
I love the way you've just said that. I'm not doing this just for the fun of doing it. I've got plenty of other things to do. I'm doing it and saying it because it's true. And I feel so aligned with you on that. I'm doing and saying this because it makes a difference. And quite frankly, we do need to stand up and say, shine a light on this. It is incredibly important. You've just said a couple of things that I'm now going to make sure I have a reel that comes out of this for. You've just said something about trust is earned. And of course it is. Anybody knows that. And also relationships are built and not bought. You build relationships. You don't buy relationships. And without talking about historic issues with marriage and various other situations, we earn each other's trust. You and I were very fortunate to have a mutual connection. You referred me to somebody else recently. And I just laughed all the way through the conversation because the conversation was all about how this person is driven by relationships. And we're not here to sell to each other. We're here to support each other and be in community with each other. And I was so surprised by I'd prepared this lovely pitch about who I was and why I should, come alongside this person and how lovely it was that Karina had introduced us. And I was totally blown away because the whole thing just went out the window. And we ended up in this very deep conversation about authenticity and what it really means to be in relationship with each other. And it was so refreshing. So thank you for that. I won't say who it is for confidentiality purposes, but how amazing to be in that space, and how amazing that I don't know if many people really get that from their day-to-day work.
I think it's very tricky, isn't it? But it's very satisfying, I think, like for me, because it opens up doors that you never thought were gonna open up just because you may have done somebody a favor. And there's so much in this world where people go, but there should be something in it for me. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. You have to put out what you want to get back. And very often you have to do stuff and you have to help people with no expectation in return. And so many people forget this. And I used to have somebody who used to say to me, you give too much, you do too many things for other people. But I'm like, but that's the way I am. And I'm not going to change that because that is just my personality. And if people ask me, I will help them because I know it will come back to me in other ways. And why not? Because I also would hope that somebody else would do the same for me. And that goes back to your point, isn't it? It's not always a hard sell. And isn't it so beautiful to create relationships? I mean, some of my relationships out in the Middle East go back 10, 15 years. And I love it because they've been in my life for so long. I've seen how they changed. They've seen how I've changed. And it's become this really beautiful relationship. And yeah, there's nothing better.
I think it's wonderful. And you're so right. Those transactional relationships, even personal transactional relationships that you do, sometimes I'm a bit naive and I think, oh, we're friendly and we're friends. And then I realize, no, 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 no. This is a transactional relationship. And especially if you have, and if there are parents listening to this, they'll know the sort I'm referring to. The person that always seems really keen to help you, but also wants their child helped as well, or they want to share the school run because they want to ask you for sleepovers, or they want to be interested in your business because ultimately they're an IFA and they want to sell you something. I've learnt the hard way, but of course I keep doing it because that's who I am. But when you meet a genuine person and you have a genuine conversation, you think there is no transaction here. It is what it is, and then that's how life should work. It's a wonderful feeling, and it feels totally. The quality of those relationships feels so different. It's just, it's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear you talk about that depth of experience you've got and how fruitful it feels 10 years in. Karina, can I ask you about StarCat? Because as a business, you do many different things, but your mission is the same and you're like a bar of rock. It runs all the way through the work you do. How did the business come about and what do you specialize in at the moment, given the markets are in a very interesting place?
Well, I think the business came about not purely as a business. It just kind of was a necessity because my son was very small. He was 3 at the time when I started the company, and I just wanted to have a bit more flexibility, which I didn't have in my day-to-day job. And that's why I thought, well, I'll just set up a business as if this was the easier route, but there you go. But what I've seen now is like how many more companies I can help. So like just today I had a meeting with a fashion brand, and they were very much like, yeah, we understand so little about the Middle East, but they are some great customers. Of course they are. So how can we stand out? What can we do different? And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm passionate about. Like, stand out, be different. Don't be the same. Don't do the same old stuff that everybody else is doing. Think a little bit outside the box. And the store was actually really beautiful. It was like literally, as I'm not going to say the brand, but it was like as if you walked into somebody's home. And I thought, oh, this is really nice. And it was not what I expected at all. And so that's basically what I do. I do strategy. I help their teams understand better how to communicate with the Middle Eastern clients, because they were saying to me, oh yeah, sometimes they're like a little bit like, oh my God, there's a bit of icy silence. And I'm like, and there's lots of different ways how you can break this and how you can instantly make this a much warmer bond. And they were like, wow, this is amazing. And at the same time, aside from the strategy, you also have to have your team comfortable, because the team may also feel anxious and think, oh my God, I don't want to do something wrong. I don't want to say the wrong title because the client might get offended. And again, titles are very big in the Middle East. So I specialize in all of this kind of consultancy, training, advisory, doing strategy for companies, because it's so important. And so many people think, again, I'll come back to this, where they're like, oh, it's the whole of the Gulf. We can just put them all together in one pot. And I'm like, no, you can't. The Saudis are different from the Emiratis, are different from the Qataris, are different from the Omanis, and they have different things. And they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, think about England, because Wales and Scotland are not the same. they're like, oh yeah, you're right. So why do you do that in a different kind of setting? So these are all the kind of things that we help with, because I just think it fosters a lot more understanding. And then in my social media content, I do like a newsletter twice a month where I talk about what's going on out there. And then every week we have a topic which I call the Middle East Sunday pages. So like the last one we did was just Saudi versus UAE on etiquette, and we'd done one Saudi versus Oman, and people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I had so many people reposting, and they were like, this is exactly it. And these were people that were in the region, and they were like, we need more of this. More people need to start saying this, because this is actually true. And I'm like, this is great, because that's exactly what I'm saying. And when people in the region say this, imagine the people in the UK and Europe, and let's not even talk about the US, that think Dubai is a country. Not everybody, but a lot of them. So if I can help demystify this a little bit and put people at ease and show them, they're not backwards. Also, a lot of them speak English. There's lots of exciting opportunities out there. Then that's kind of my job done.
I just think I'm not going to make any comments about America, but I think you're right. It's so interesting when you see the differences and what a sensible, even in France, the different personality types when we're talking to somebody from Marseille versus somebody from Paris. It's so different, and they're both cities. Go out into rural areas, and again, you're in a whole different cultural place as well. We just seem to have broad brushed the whole of the Gulf and thought, well, it's all the same. Something I've noticed, Karina, in talking to parents from different regions is they've got very different experiences themselves, especially depending on where they grew up. Are they original? Have they come in from different areas and they're now living in a different country? It tells a different story, and then they have different demands or expectations of their children specifically, and obviously they run their businesses in different ways. But it's very, very interesting when you start asking questions. Would you consider this? What do you think about that? What are your thoughts and feelings here, in a nice way? But you do learn an awful lot, and yes, very, very different depending on the experience. You said something about strategy, and I see people sort of go operational, not strategic. And I also see people, especially businesses, not really understanding who am I, which means they don't really understand the who are you piece. You've just talked about a fashion brand who then sort of really had to think, okay, so who am I, and now who are they, and where am I in that context? Can you talk to me a little bit more about I haven't phrased that terribly well, but that challenge of identity, both of the client going into a different customer base, and also that identity piece that becomes a little bit jumbled when it's the strategic and the operational muddled up?
I think, yeah, I think that's exactly it. In order to understand how to reach these kind of customers, I think you need to understand what matters to them. And that often is very much tied in what matters to the country. And, also how do they consume information. And that is so interesting because, and I keep bringing up this statistic, for example, in Saudi, 70% of the local population is under 35. So they are all very young. They are very tech savvy. Social media usage in the whole of the Gulf is over 90%. So this is where they get all their information from. So it's no good if you're trying to do 1 million email campaigns. Nobody's even going to look at them. You need to go where your customer is, and you need to go and see what matters to them and how can you tap into this. And this is, again, very different from what you do in the US. And that's why it is so important to understand the local context. And I've told this story quite a lot. Last year, I was actually asked to give a lecture to some marketing students at Goldsmiths University about the Middle East. And that came at a really perfect time because Saudi had just run this amazing campaign. They always, from sort of October all the way until February, March time, they have a thing in Riyadh called Riyadh Season. And Riyadh Season is all about entertainment and what they can bring. And every year they make it bigger. And last year they had this amazing story. And I was like, this is what the West can learn from Saudi. So basically, they had one of the sections of Riyadh Season was a section called, oh my God, I lost my train of thought. There we go. It was called Boulevard Runway. And what it was, basically, they brought 3 or 4 planes, old planes from Saudia, which is the national airline. And instead of flying them from Jeddah, where they came, to Riyadh, which is quite a long journey, they actually took them by land. And while they took it by land, which caused quite a stir, they went one step further. And Turkey Al Sheikh, the guy who's in charge of all the entertainment, basically came out on his Twitter and said, so the person who will produce the best video or the best picture will get one supercar. And the response was amazing. And then he topped it up and he said, actually, we'll make it 6 supercars. So social media, for the people that were following around the local content, I mean, social media was on fire. It was phenomenal. They had people having picnics. People brought their babies. They brought their grandmothers. They brought their tea, their coffee. It was just so beautiful. They brought their camels. And everybody had heard about this boulevard runway before they even launched it. It was such a great story. And I said, this is how you do marketing because it's local. It was the local airline. They did it locally. And everybody already in the local vicinity had heard about this great place that they wanted to go because the campaign was so good. And I was like, and that's the kind of stuff you need to look at. And if you want to do things like this, you need to then look at some of the local things and how can you include them in your pitch? And that's the only way to win. And I actually went to this Boulevard runway. It was amazing. They had like a restaurant in one of the old planes. It was like the best thing ever. It was so good. But I was such a fan of the whole campaign, and I did like quite a few. I did an edition of my Middle East Sunday pages on it, and I talked about it on social media because I loved it, and it was just so joyful. It was like one of the best things that I've seen in ages.
Oh, Karina, that's an amazing story. That's like the best of the best sort of guerrilla marketing tactics, isn't it? But on point, local, relevant, and globally newsworthy, but very, very dialed in to what you're trying to achieve. And I can't think of anything I've seen that really comes anywhere close to the power of that message that's sort of tasteful. I mean, I see some very distasteful things happening in the world. I won't comment on any of them and share my own thoughts. But you know, things I think, wow, it's generated a lot of publicity, but look at the lengths you had to go to get it. And that sounds like one of the most wholesome stories. And actually excited. There's me thinking, what would I have done if I thought there was an opportunity, to win 6 supercars? What an amazing story.
I mean, but not only the story, I think also like how much joy did it bring to people? Because people generally loved it because it made it like, it made it an event, and you had the different villages doing different things. And then I read a story about how all the different villages actually looked after the drivers and made sure that they had some rest and they had food, which again ties in very much with Middle Eastern hospitality. But it was just so beautiful. It was like one of the best stories I've seen, and I just love it.
It reminds me of my own experience when Princess Diana got married to Prince Charles in the 80s, and it was such a big thing. And of course, we've got the photographs of, there were hat competitions, and it was such a wholesome experience. And it really brought, any of these royal things in the UK really do drive the economy because it's that feel good factor. And here we are seeing that reflected in a different context, but with the same pulling on those strings of human behaviour, which is what I'm all about. I know we could talk for hours, and before we started recording, we did allude to the fact that we will meet up next week and have a proper conversation as well, so we can have our social time. But before we close, Karina, we're going live on LinkedIn. We're also we'll go live on Spotify and all the other channels as a proper edited podcast coming up in in future weeks. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because there's so much in there. I almost don't know I don't even know where to close. Anything else that we didn't talk about that you'd like to touch on?
I think what I would want to say is that your strategy is really what is going to make or break your business in the Middle East. So you have to get this right from the very beginning. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work, because I just think, you have such an opportunity with all these amazing projects that are out there. But if you go in there with this attitude that you know it all and you don't need to learn, then that's never going to work. And one of the other things I always say is if you go in there and you make assumptions about what people might like and might not like, and you don't actually do your research, that's also not going to work. And then people go and say, oh yeah, I tried the Middle East, it didn't quite work. Yeah, it didn't quite work because you didn't do the work beforehand and you didn't prepare. And that's exactly why I think a lot of companies need to rethink their approach before they go out there.
I think the same applies to every human I ever work with. We have to do the work. We have to do the inner work. There's no point just going to the gym and doing the outer work. It's the inner work that you and I have done that makes the difference to how we show up in the world and how we serve. It's so important in business as well. Karina, thank you so much for today. We could talk for hours on this, especially digging into this sort of, I think, almost assumption that etiquette doesn't matter anymore. And I'm a big stickler for table manners. It drives my children and my husband completely mad. But there is a way to use a knife and fork, and that's been passed down through the ages. In the same way that there's a way to use chopsticks, there's the same way there's a way to eat food in different other countries. It's very important that we're aware of that. It's a bit like turning up at church in your bikini. It's just not really the done thing, even if you do look like Claudia Schiffer or whoever else might be on the cover of Vogue this month. So yes, let's remember that this is important for being a rich, simple human. Karina, thank you so much. If anybody wants to find you, best places to find you: LinkedIn, website, and any other channels.
Instagram, TikTok, we're like everywhere. So you can find me anywhere.
Great. And the handle on most of those accounts is what?
I mean, obviously on LinkedIn, it's my name, Karina Götz. And then on the other ones, it's pretty much the same. It's all Starcat, which is my company, Karina. But if you type in my name, it's not like it's not a very common name. So you'll find me quite easily.
That's because you're a very unique, rich, simple human, of course. And on that note, I will leave you here. Listeners, thank you very much for dialing in again. If you'd like to talk about behaviour change, please speak to me on any of my channels. If you'd like to talk to Karina, please speak to speak to her on any of her channels. And of course, we're both available for workshops, speaker opportunities, and any other conversations about our passions that you would like to engage us in. So until next time, thank you so much for today.